bit of a treat next. I think for a long time, housing developers have taken a fair amount of stick for not wanting to adopt SuDS, but I think or not implement SuDS. But I think over the last few years, certainly the last couple of years, we've started to see a shift in that. We've already heard today a couple of times how housing developers are getting on board. So presentation 3, we've got Glenn Holliday. He's the engineering manager with Redrow Homes. Glenn has 20 years experience across various sectors, including design, highway authority, and on developer side. And he's looking at the design of SuDS systems, working as part of a working group at Kent County Council when the SAB was due to be implemented. And he also looks after implementation of SuDS within Redrow South East developments. And he will be presenting alongside Dan Samaila. He's an associate director at WSP. Dan is a project director, project manager, responsible for the project and technical delivery of development projects across major UK residential and commercial developments. And he's responsible for liaison with planning, statutory and regulatory authorities to obtain necessary consents and approvals to enable development. So they, as we heard earlier, they've been working, WSP have been working with Redrow Homes to deliver a number of development sites within Kent, so working closely with Bromwyn. And their presentation today is going to focus on the design and delivery of SuDS on the site that we've just seen at Fleets Green to enhance the development, and looks at the relationships developed with the LPA and the LLFA during the course of the development. So I shall pass you over to our next presenters.
It's nice to be the only developer in the room. Don't throw anything, will you?
Well, thank you all for having us. We are going to be touching on a number of things that we as developer and designer have encountered in developing or promoting SuDS within Kent especially. As Bromwyn said, we hadn't actually seen her slides, but now that we have, we probably should have used hers instead. At least that would take us halfway through our discussions for today. But nonetheless, we'll start off with some introductions. Glenn will touch on a bit of himself and myself, and I'll touch on myself. We'll talk about some development key drivers, things that developers would try to look for in a development from a design developer's perspective. I would also touch on some of the things I would look for from a designer's perspective. We'll talk about general delivery of SuDS in Kent with particular emphasis on the Ebbsfleet Green development. We'll touch on key relationships and challenges faced in delivering these SuDS and some of the lessons learned in delivering Ebbsfleet Green in particular, and how we can take that into the next steps into other developments. So without further ado, I'll just ask Glenn to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Glenn Holliday. I'm currently engineering manager for Redrow Homes. I previously worked for highway adoption authorities at Kent, and I've also been a designer.
My name is Dan Samaila. As a bit of a background, I have a civil engineering background as well, a chartered engineer. Bit of project management and highway design experience. Done a lot of work with trying to promote sustainable drainage, following the footsteps of some of my peers, some of them in the room as well. Trying to just do the best you can do from a designer's perspective. One of the things I did get involved with SERA especially was being a project steering group member of the structural design and geotechnical design of modular geocellular drainage tanks systems. So yes, trying to do as best as I can to improve ourselves, be able to put into developments as we go into design stages. Development.
So, from a development point of view, obviously I'm a developer, boo, but we're here to sell houses, build developments and sell houses. But there's a bigger purpose we understand that goes in and around our developments. So, a few of the key drivers that we have from a developer's point of view are: we want to build high quality homes, create places where people really want to live, build sustainable, vibrant communities, and more recently at Redrow, go net gain on biodiversity. That's something that our group is driving out, and it's something that's a work in progress, but will be coming out over our developments. Obviously, when we talk about SuDS, there's an underlying more sometimes more important issue, the water management, which is where Dan comes in.
Yeah, so as a designer, and again I use the word designer a bit loosely because yes, I have a civil engineering background, but in terms of designers, I mean the general design team encompassing landscape architects, architects and planners, just generally ecologists as well, don't forget ecologists, trying to promote as best we can SuDS features that enhance development. So ultimately, SuDS, key driver to be able to enhance the environment in which we, developers build their houses on.
Some of the things that Redrow look at when we develop our sites, I just want to run through a few of the things that we strive to achieve, and that's design for connection, community spaces, and we like to promote walking and cycling. When it comes to nature, we want to put green routes, natural usable open spaces, and help people connect with nature on their doorsteps. This, in the past, maybe hasn't been achieved as much as we'd like, but moving forward with the net gain and actually learning more about SuDS, we hope as a developer we can achieve this. And obviously we want to promote freedom to roam, peace and quiet, and places where families can have fun.
Yeah, I think that emphasis on trying to create a good space for people to actually live in, have fun and enjoy is one of the things we also try and help the developers to promote. But more importantly, we need to also recognize the local setting in which developments sit in, because we'll touch on the local issues later on in the slides, but trying to make sure we recognize that there are things that influence a design of a SuDS scheme, which are local to each individual site.
Currently in the southeast, which is where I'm based, we have numerous developments across Kent, all of which we have had liaison with Bronwyn and her team at Kent in the lead local flood authority. Today we're going to be talking about Ebbsfleet. That's up and running and a good way through the build process. We've also got one at Tilden Gill, which has just started, and then one in the future is Coningbrook Park.
Yes, and again, just to re-emphasize that each scheme needs to reflect the setting in which it's set at. So, yes, we have developments all across Kent, Redrow promoting a lot of them, but a lot of them actually reflect the local setting in which it's set. So, for instance, Ebbsfleet Green, we'll touch on its constraints later on, but that kind of influences what we actually put forward in terms of SuDS. Okay,
Ebbsfleet Green. It's a 38-hectare site. It's a former National Grid substation, as Bronwyn alluded to earlier. The existing pylons through the site were to remain. We got outline planning permission in March 2014, and that was with Dartford Borough Council before EDC came on board. Phase 1 strategic reserve matters was given in December 2015. That was for Phase 1 infrastructure, earthworks and the spine roads. And then we got Phase 1 residential in 2016. Subsequently from there, we've gone on, we've had Phase 2 and Phase 3.
Just to mention, most of these strategic SuDS required to service the whole development actually sits within that corridor highlighted in blue. So that kind of moves on to the next slide in terms of the constraints. Apologies, I can see it very well on my screen here, but unfortunately the contours don't actually come out on the display there. But it's a very steeply sloping site. You've got about over 30-meter level difference between one side of the site to the other. Other constraints were, trying to get the flood flow paths mimicking, or the proposed mimicking what the existing would do. You've got, again, apologies you can't see the contours, but those are the kind of flood flow routes that water would naturally permeate to get to a low point on the site at that corner. Existing constraints also were the electric pylons that kind of traverse through the site in that direction, so more or less causing a kind of a corridor that you can't really put any houses in. We've also got issues of noise from the A2, which sits kind of across the site that way, and to mitigate against the noise issues, we had a big noise bund with a fence, acoustic fence, sat across that side of the site. So all those kind of informed the development of the SuDS scheme, utilizing as much as possible that corridor that was almost sterilized, more or less sterilized by the pylons, but then linking all those into a corner where we can then discharge into existing outfall of the site, which Bronwyn mentioned is a culvert literally underneath the South Fleet Road. And we have the drainage restrictions to cater for. So a big site, but utilizing the constraints of the site. Again, we mentioned about keeping things local, keeping things specific to the site setting in which it's sat. That then informed how we actually developed the development strategy. Now, I've got a colleague in the site. We mentioned we had pre-app discussions with the client. So some of my colleague, Chris Palmer, some of you may know, he was keen trying to get those discussions going to be able to inform how the site develops. And then progressively developed what the site actually did in terms of development parcels that more or less mimicked the existing flow for paths and drainage regime to link into that central corridor to get to our outfall. So I won't bother you too much with technical details. A lot of you know the principles of SuDS and how SuDS kind of fit in to try and shape a development.
Okay, where we are now. We've currently built out phase 1A and phase 1B. Also built out phase 1C, and the pub and hotel are up and running, have been for about a year. Phase 2 is probably 80% built, and phase 3 probably 50% in the ground now. Coming forward, we've got phase 2C and phase 4 in the northern boundary. And we've got sports pitches and a pavilion. We did like this site so much that we decided to put our regional office there as well.
Yeah, just to mention that decision for Redrow to actually locate was kind of midway through the kind of planning process, because that was always going to be a residential area. I know Bronwyn mentioned about when things change, being flexible enough to have those discussions and how impermeable areas change from the original strategy. Some other things that did actually change were, oops, should I go back? There was going to be a hotel there, but the pub was actually meant to be in that space. But during the course of the development, in building out phase 1 and 1B, and to accommodate Redrow's desire to put their offices in, we've had to more or less rejig the drainage strategy to accommodate these changes. So it's always good to have that early discussions on how we implement changes from the start of the development into delivery.
Okay, relationships. From the outset, it's very, very important for me to get the right team on board, be it from the original architect to the engineer. I'm happy to say that this engineer did all right because he's still standing next to me. So it's very important to get that buy-in at a very early stage, because that helps me understand it as well. As a developer, obviously, we're looking at the site as a whole, need to get numbers, but we need the team around us to help us see the bigger picture. Early engagement with the lead local flood authority. This, for us at Redrow, is a major part of what we do. As Bronwyn said earlier, open door policy. We get in a due diligence stage. We speak to Bronwyn and her team, and we try to understand the constraints and what we can do going forward. Then there's the local planning authority. In Ebbsfleet, obviously, we've got the EDC. We're working well with them. Obviously, we're part of their vision for their garden city, so we do try and work closely with them.
Yeah, just touch briefly on processes as well. PreAPPs, again, very important. I think everyone's kind of known the importance of that. But I can't just stress how important it is to do that regularly. A scheme like Ebbsfleet takes a number of years over a number of phases. So for each phase, we do try and get that early discussion about how to deliver that particular phase. A lot of times we do have overlaps between early stage of one phase while you're actually delivering and trying to verify what you've actually built on all the phases. So we do have, say, joint meetings to talk about phases, different phases in the same meeting, which can get confusing sometimes because you turn up to a meeting probably not with the right set of sheets and documents. What we've done in this phase over the years actually had a lot of discussions, as I mentioned, PreAPPs, and also kind of looking at what we've actually built. This is a picture of a discussion we've had with Bronwyn's team. This is actually a meeting that we ended up having in the new pub that was built on site. And we did that as part of a site visit as well, just trolling through the site and just looking at what's been built and how to demonstrate that what we've built meets the objectives of the scheme.
So the delivery team, again, it's important to get the right contractor, and when we issue the pack, it's important to sit down at pre-start and actually get through to the contractor what we're looking for. How many times have I sat there with a piece of paper that looks great, and then at the end of the job I walk out there and I see something that is lower than my expectations when it's finally produced? Again, we need to, that comes from us as a developer, to try and enforce, one, installation records, because we'll come on to that later with the verification reports. But it's important to make sure that we get what we want. You know, it's all right these guys doing all the upfront work and getting that vision put down on paper if our contractors don't deliver it.
Yes, and again on processes, we talked about on Bronwyn's slides about the planning policy that's been evolving over the years. We can imagine this development started in 2014. The actual, what do you call him? Enabling works to start the development platforms. And over the years, enough guidance has developed over, within Kent, within the local authorities, within EDC themselves, in how, what process they go through. So it's always good to keep abreast on and being flexible about some of those processes in light with evolving design guides and stuff.
And another point is we give our SuDS over to a management company at the moment. There's no one else who will adopt them. Having that management plan in place that's robust enough to make sure that the SuDS environment looks the same throughout its life. That's a very important part of what we need to do as developers, because we issue that to the management company.
And then we'll come to verification later on, if you don't mind. Key requirements.
Okay, so this is a personal thing for me, what I look for at Redrow. So the early engagement, that's vital. A clear vision for the scheme, and then a design team buy-in to that vision so that we're all going in one direction. There's always that crossover between the functional and the desirable. And then we try and incorporate nature and biodiversity. When it comes to delivery, I mentioned before, competent contractors, and then a comprehensive records of installation, which helps us going forward in getting our sign-off for the verification.
Yes, just a quick highlight on the crossover between functionality and desirability. So we'll do a little, small exercise later on just to test that concept. So the journey so far. Early days, we mentioned is a very, steeply sloping site. Major level differences across the site. So to enable just to create your development platforms to start off with, a lot of bulk earthworks took place. We had a lot of soil nailing along the boundaries, northern boundaries of the site. We had the noise bund to build, and we had loads of cut and fill within the site to then develop the SuDS areas. A lot of earthworks went in to establish the SuDS features and also shape them. So this is a view across this corridor where the primary SuDS features were kept. So when you look at the journey that, going from, say, this, creating the features, to then actually get a scheme, then looks good.
So we're quite pleased with how it turned out. What was almost a dead space underneath some pylons, we feel we've created a corridor which actually looks quite attractive for the people who live on our developments.
Yeah. So in terms of delivering a SuDS scheme, we look at things that aesthetically pleasing. Is it an area that people can actually utilize? So you can see we've got footpaths that run right through it. We've got features, sitting benches, people can sit down, planters. We've got play provision as well, trim trail across the site. And there's a picture of one of the basins. And we've also got a wet pond at the very, along the SuDS train. But all these features, is to enhance them and make them usable so that people can actually, enjoy them, make use of them. Don't know if someone recognizes that picture, but I'll keep silent about who that is. Yeah, so some of the challenges in delivering. Okay, so some of the challenges in delivering SuDS. We all talked about, that's an excerpt from the serious SuDS manual. But water quality, water quantity, amenity, and biodiversity. So if, as a show of hands, if I could ask from the top picture and the bottom picture, trying to balance out those, pillars of SuDS. Can I just ask, who preferred, say, the top feature that gives you lots of space out there to actually interact? That's a low-flow channel. There are two pictures of a basin. Does anybody have a preference on the top one or the bottom one that shows a lot of planting with a lot of, biodiversity habitats being created? Top one? Bottom one? Okay. Interesting that we have a lot of people that prefer this over this, because end of the day, that's a picture of the same basin. We started off having a feature like this with a lot of planting to enhance biodiversity. But again, public perception, people didn't, or residents didn't seem to like that. They preferred something like this that people could actually interact with. So some of the challenges in terms of perspectives is really key in terms of challenges. How do we show that a SuDS scheme delivers its benefits, its multiple benefits? Because there's always a subjective nature to what makes something acceptable. Again, planning policy in terms of, yes, we talk about that subjective nature of it. Can you actually put that into policy? Can that actually determine what you actually build? So that's the challenges we face on the Absolute Green. The Emerging Kent policy talked about verification reports. So yes, we've done an initial trial of this to say, well, we've done all the schemes we've done, put the forms together, make the submissions to try and see whether we can get those approved. We're still, I think we've done a pilot on them, but we're still doing that process, trying to refine what we actually do to actually get those features accepted and certified, as it were, that they meet their objectives. Lessons learned? Okay,
well, I think went well is understanding the SuDS approval process. I think we've achieved that, but we're still learning and moving forward. The early engagement with the lead local flood authority, and we also like the user-friendly guidance from the lead local flood authority in Kent.
Yes, and then what could we improve going forward? We talked about design guides. Kent have a lot of, the design guides, the policy statements. What about source adoption 8? I know there's another terminology for it. I'm sure our chair would. Thank you. How would that affect things going forward in terms of design, implementation, and acceptance? How does that affect what the public perception would be? Now, we don't know what source adoption comes forward, but what other emerging design guides would influence such design. However, Redrow have actually taken some of these, taken a driver on terms of what they want to see going forward, which I'll let Glenn explain on the emerging. This is actually a picture from one of their. This
is something that obviously our net gains is trying to get people involved in nature. Where we've got a swell, we don't want to have them sitting on the edge. We want to actually get them involved. So having walkways through dry basins to get them in there. And actually making it a more interactive sort of environment.
Okay. So next steps. Sorry about if we run out a bit longer. Yeah. So we will continue to work with the LLFA and the LPA to deliver SuDS. Again, it's an interactive process, especially when we have to make changes to the original strategies that were established early on. And we'll try as much as possible to take the lessons learned in Absolute on other developments into emerging developments going forward. So one of the things we're working with Redrow on is the next development in Cunningbrook Park. This is in Ashford, so interesting. Bromley alluded to about what the emerging thoughts about usable space. What defines usable space? So we will test that on this scheme because we've got ample opportunity to actually define or to design our basins to reflect that, because once we start putting basins with water, bodies of water, they don't count as usable space according to Ashford. So that's a good test to see how that develops. We've also got a Tilden Gill tented in, where we, again, recognizing the local constraints of a particular site. That site initially had a big basin right in the middle of the site. So this is not a desire to have a such feature that big. It was already existing. But in order to be able to develop the design of that, we actually had to sit down with Bronwyn, and she actually gave us some advice about establishing what some of the restrictions to the discharge from off-site into our site. And we actually took that on board and actually saved us a bit of storage room, taking that advice on board. So thank you for listening to us, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think I've ever seen so many people in a pub without a drink. Anyway, any questions from the floor? Got a few minutes before we move on. Sorry.
Hi. Were there any challenges building around electricity pylons from the energy suppliers?
Just trying to get a screenshot of, yes. So very early on, we actually, as part of the consultation processes, while we consulted with the local authority, we were also having discussions with the network operators. So they gave us clear guidance in terms of offset distances to keep clear for putting anything in there. So you might notice that not that many trees underneath the pylons. That was based on their recommendations, and they've got design guides to guide us. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay.
So there wasn't anything like having to keep your SuDS away or doing special protection measures, or
Not for the actual features themselves, but for the construction of them, there were operational guidance in terms of what plants you can bring underneath that and what protection measures you need to have. And then for the maintenance of these, that went into the operational manual that any operatives, any maintenance need to be of a certain size and clearance. They can't come in with large vehicles coming into that zone.
okay, thank you for that.
I've got a question for Glenn. Obviously, today's about collaboration, and the contractor is a key part of that collaboration. And you spoke about the importance of Redrow getting what they wanted. So I wondered how you managed the contractor. A lot of whom are just muck shifters to make sure. I think we saw earlier curbs around a rain garden. I just wondered how you make sure you get what you want from the contractor.
I'd like to say we always have, but I can't say that. It's down to me getting it through to my site teams. The way we work at Redrow, I'm actually on site a lot of the time. So I'm a presence on site. I get to go out there, see it go in. I'm looking at stuff. We have as-built done at a very early stage, so we can catch it before people move in. So when the roads go in, curb heights, things like that, we're checking all these things so they're in line with the drawings. It hasn't always been successful, I'm not going to lie. But going forward, as a region in the southeast and as a group at Redrow, it is something that we are trying to clamp down on our contractors, not let them go off charging down a field, as we like to call it, and doing what they want.
Tim Dorr from Sistra. One of the key absentees today, I feel, is the Highways Authority representatives, and Bronwyn alluded to this earlier, that the Kent Highways Authority has certain reservations about SuDS features. In your design and in Redrow's experience with developments elsewhere, do you meet early resistance in trying to put highway-associated SuDS in, or is it something that's a bit hit and miss depending on which area you are in?
From my personal point of view, I can only talk about the southeast. And yes, we've met that wall in most areas. I'm actually ex-KCC Highway Adoption Authority, so that's my background. And it's not changed all the time I was there. It's not changed since I come over to the developer side. Bronwyn is doing a great job in trying to push it through. But I would say in Kent, they're probably one of the better ones that I've dealt with. My ex-boss was very, very proactive in trying to push it through, but you've always got the maintenance side of things. So yes, we are getting that resistance.
Probably just to add a bit more, I guess your angle is on the adopted highway parts of roads on the development?
More SuDS directly related to the highway runoff itself.
Adopted highway. Yes. So I think while we would like to have over the curb drainage into open areas, you then have that issue of who maintains those areas because it's outside the highway. And I don't think Kent highways, it's just that they don't adopt those areas yet. So that's where the problem lies. Sorry, Bronwyn's going to probably correct me.
We've had a change in staff in the highways drainage team.
Okay.
It's created a huge impact in actual fact. So we've got a couple of schemes coming forward where we've got highway swales coming in and they will be adopted under highway adoption. So they are trying to move away from the creation of gullies. I think there's a recognition that by putting assets in, you actually have a need to maintain it. And if they put it into a swale, well, that actually goes to landscape maintenance, not the highway drainage team budget. So I think there is a real recognition about how maintenance is best done and it might be better done elsewhere.